When I was just a child, the world around me seemed both vast and empty. Growing up in a quiet neighborhood with silent streets and backyards surrounded by white fences, my mind found refuge in imagination. I called myself the explorer, and with just a notebook and a pencil in my hands, I created entire worlds inside my head. I remember the solitary afternoons in my room. The sunlight would pass through the curtains, casting dancing shapes on the walls. It was there that my adventures began. With a scribbled notebook and a pile of children's books for inspiration, I invented stories that filled the gaps in my reality. I drew floating castles, fantastical creatures with wings made of tissue paper, and heroes who always resembled me. Each page in my notebook was a portal to another world, and I was the sovereign king of them all. "Nathan, are you talking to yourself again?" my mother would ask from the door with an indulgent smile. She never interrupted me. She always said my imagination was a gift. At school, things were a bit different. I was never the most popular kid or the one dominating games during recess. In fact, I spent a lot of time alone, sitting under a tree in the corner of the yard. While the others ran and played, I created stories in my mind. I invented characters with extraordinary abilities, each with such vivid personalities that I could almost hear them talking to me. I drew them in a small notebook I carried everywhere. There was Lily, the girl who could control the stars with her hands, Jasper, a robot who wanted to be human, and Milo, a warrior who faced giant monsters in the name of justice. My teachers called it a distraction. I called it company. "What are you drawing so much, Nathan?" Mr. Holloway, my art teacher, asked while I was bent over my notebook during class. "My friends," I replied without looking up. He gave a half smile and said, "You have a special talent. Don't let the world erase it." Those words stayed with me for a long time. My parents always supported me. My mother loved to hang my drawings on the fridge, and my father encouraged me to read stories before bed. He said that great creative minds needed to feed their ideas. That's how I discovered the classics of children's literature, like the Chronicles of Narnia and The Wizard of Oz. These stories inspired me to dream even bigger. However, not everyone was as understanding. Some kids at school laughed at me. "Here comes the kid who talks to imaginary friends," I'd say. It was painful, but I learned to ignore them. I always thought they don't understand. They can't see what I see. Loneliness, which for many would be unbearable, became my refuge. I filled every empty moment with adventures. On the way to school, I imagined I was crossing a dangerous jungle, dodging traps, and escaping hunters. When I helped my mother water the garden, I pretended I was cultivating magical plants that could cure any disease. My creativity was infinite. Everything changed in high school. By then, I had grown used to being alone. I continued drawing and creating stories, but I began to wonder if that was enough. I wanted something more, something real. That's when I met her. Her name was Emily. I first noticed her in a literature class. She was sitting 2 rows ahead, writing something in a small notepad. I didn't know what it was, but I could see the concentration on her face. During the class, the teacher asked us to read a poem aloud. Emily was called on. Her voice was soft but firm, and she seemed to bring each word to life. I was mesmerized. After class, I gathered the courage to talk to her. My imaginary friends, who by then were rarer, whispered in my mind, encouraging me. "Hi, I'm Nathan," I said, with a nervous smile. She looked at me and returned the smile. "Hi, Nathan. I'm Emily. I liked the way you read that poem. Do you write too?" Her eyes lit up. "I do. In fact, I was working on a poem right now." "Really? Can I see it?" I asked, trying not to seem too eager. She hesitated for a moment, but eventually handed me the notepad. I carefully read the words. It was a poem about the sea, about waves that carried secrets and storms that held memories. It was beautiful. "You have an incredible talent," I said, handing the notebook back to her. "Thank you," she replied, blushing slightly. "And you? Do you write? Maybe I'll show you someday." From that day on, we started talking more and more. I discovered that she also loved creating stories, and we often shared our ideas with each other. She had an energy that lit up everything around her. For the first time, I felt like I'd found someone who understood my world, someone who could see things the way I did. My imagination, which had always been my only refuge, now became a bridge. I started creating stories not just for myself, but for her too. I wrote short tales and gave them to Emily during breaks. She read them enthusiastically and always gave me feedback. It was an exchange I had never experienced before. Over time, Emily became more than a friend. She was my confidant, my inspiration. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need to invent a world to feel happy. The real world, with Emily by my side, was enough. The months that followed felt like a dream. Emily and I spent hours talking about our stories, ideas, and ambitions. Sometimes we'd spend entire afternoons in the park, sitting under a tree while I sketched and she wrote. She laughed at my exaggerated creations, and I loved how she turned ordinary situations into something poetic. The connection between us was so natural that, before we knew it, we were dating. Our years together were marked by simple yet meaningful moments. We celebrated small victories, like Emily being published in a local magazine, and faced challenges, like when I failed to get into an art school on my first try. But Emily was there to support me. She always said, "Nathan, you're a creator. No matter where you are, your imagination will always find a way to shine." Eventually, we found stability in our careers. Emily got a job as an editor at an independent publishing house, and I started illustrating children's books. It was the perfect combination. She polished the stories and I brought them to life with my art. Our routines were so seamlessly intertwined, it felt like we were made for each other. When we reached our 5th anniversary, I decided it was time to take the next step. I planned a romantic dinner at our favorite restaurant, and at the end of the night, I got down on one knee and proposed to Emily. Her eyes filled with tears as she said yes. It was one of the happiest days of my life. The wedding was simple but perfect. Only close friends and family attended. Emily looked radiant in her white dress, and I couldn't believe my luck to have her by my side. After the wedding, we took our dream trip to France, where we explored museums, ate croissants in charming cafes, and wandered through the streets of Paris. Our life felt like it came straight out of a fairy tale. We bought a small house with a garden in the back, where Emily planted flowers, and I set up an art studio. We spent nights together on the couch, discussing ideas for books and dreaming about the future. Everything seemed perfect, at least on the surface. It was around our 2nd wedding anniversary that things began to change. At first, it was just small remarks Emily made. Comments like, "You could be more ambitious. Nathan, don't you think it's time to aim higher? Or I feel like you settle too much. Let's take more risks." I agreed because she always seemed to have our best interests at heart. But over time, the suggestions turned into demands. Emily began insisting that I take on projects that were outside my comfort zone, saying I needed to prove my worth. When I hesitated to accept an illustration job for a dubious author, she accused me of being cowardly. "You'll never achieve anything if you keep being so afraid, Nathan. I'm the only one who truly believes in you. You can't disappoint me." I took the project, even though I knew it wasn't the right choice. And to my surprise, it was a success. Emily was right, at least this time. That gave me the confidence to follow her ideas, even though deep down I didn't feel comfortable. However, things began to escalate. Emily suggested that I use my talent to make money in less conventional ways. "You know, your drawings could bring a fortune in the right market," she would say. At first, I refused, but she kept insisting, reminding me that no one else would support me like she did. "Do you think anyone will value you like I do? You need to learn how to seize opportunities, Nathan." First, it was small forgeries of famous artists' signatures. Then, copies of artwork sold as originals. I felt awful, but Emily always had a justification. "We're just bending the rules to our advantage. This isn't a crime, it's cleverness." The longer time went on, the harder it became to say no. Emily's manipulation was subtle but effective. She alternated between moments of affection and cutting words that chipped away at my self-esteem. "Without me, you're nothing, Nathan. Remember that." I didn't know how to escape, nor if I even wanted to. After all, Emily was the one who made me feel special. She was my partner, my muse. Even as my conscience weighed on me, I convinced myself that I was doing it for us, for our future. The months that followed were a whirlwind. The success of the illicit work that Emily had pushed me into brought money, but also a growing shadow of paranoia. I felt constantly watched, afraid someone would discover what I had done. But Emily was always there, calming me with sweet words. "You're just imagining things, Nathan. Trust me, everything will be fine," she would say, holding my hands with her steady and reassuring gaze. For a while, I believed her. I needed to believe her. Then came the night when everything came crashing down. It was a cold night and I was sitting in our small studio, finishing yet another of Emily's projects. She was in the room, excitedly talking about a new scheme that, according to her, would make us rich. Suddenly, I heard loud banging on the door. My heart raced. "Nathan Smith, open the door. It's the police." I felt my body freeze. I looked at Emily, hoping she had an answer, a plan, anything that could save us. But to my surprise, she just smiled. "Trust me," was all she said before disappearing through the studio door. The police broke through the entrance seconds later. They handcuffed me, searched the house, and found more than enough evidence to incriminate me. Screaming for Emily, I begged her to explain everything, to prove that she was the one who had orchestrated all of this. "Who is Emily?" one of the officers asked, furrowing his brow. "My wife," I shouted, exasperated. "She was here just now. She's the one responsible." The look of confusion on their faces was like a punch to the stomach. "I didn't know he had an accomplice," one of the officers said. "She wasn't in any of the reports. Maybe it's recent," another added. Minutes passed as the officers searched the house again and the area around it, but they found no trace of Emily. Nothing, not even a fingerprint. "He's probably just trying to frame some poor random woman," said a fourth officer. "This is ridiculous," I retorted, trying to break free from the handcuffs. "Can't you see? She was right here." The evidence, however, told another story. Forged documents, fraudulent contracts, and piles of drawings, all signed by me. Emily was nowhere to be found. At the trial, I tried to explain, but my arguments sounded like delusions. My lawyers suggested I plead insanity, but I refused. How could I be insane if I remembered every detail of my life with Emily? But at the same time, something didn't add up. Why were there no photos of her in the house? Why had no one ever mentioned her in public? Months later, I was convicted, not to a conventional prison, but to a psychiatric institution. The doctors said I suffered from schizoaffective disorder, with vivid and detailed delusions that led me to create a completely fictitious person. The walls of the room were padded, suffocating, and silence was my only companion. Except for her. She was still there, smiling at me, just like she always did. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.